Thank you, Mary, very much. And how may I say how delighted I am to be here. I was a white male, major public school, Oxbridge, middle class, heterosexual, able-bodied man. And I was interested in the bar and trained to be a barrister. And I was poached from my second division set by Cloisters, who offered me a tenancy. And for 3 months, I was a tenant at Cloisters. And then I had a stroke on the day before the millennium, which changed my life. And it changed my life absolutely. In so many ways, both the physical and mental disability that the stroke had, but also the reaction that the legal profession, both solicitors and barristers, and the judges' profession had to me. After all, the same person as I was before I suffered the stroke. The very idea that I should come back. I remember I was asked by my senior clerk to write a list of those solicitors I thought would come up with me from my former chambers to Cloisters. And I wrote him out a list of 85 solicitors, individual solicitors who came. After the stroke, precisely one solicitor stayed with me. One solicitor stayed with me. I think I became a better lawyer because, or I could argue, I could cross-examine, but I suddenly was aware of life if you weren't white, middle-class, public school, Oxbridge, heterosexual, able-bodied. I know that sounds absurd. It sounds absurd that me, traveling as I did, I went to Africa many times, I went to Eastern and Western Europe many times. I took 2 gap years, but I really only began to understand how people who live with me in England felt if they were not white, middle-class, public school, Oxbridge, able-bodied, etc., etc., etc. I was really interested in hearing a book, and I will definitely get one. This one, Clustered Injustices, is amazing. It's by fellow academic Luke Clements. What he talks about is various groups of people, and especially in this case disabled people, not having one problem, but multiple problems and multiple things they must deal with to get even on a par with, if you're talking disabled, non-disabled people. A good example is the fact that most state institutions who are, after all, only applying the law, don't in fact apply the law. They interpret the law so as to deprive disabled people of money and other benefits, and they get away with it because the only thing a disabled person can do is to fight them through the courts and tribunals. But they have an injustice as far as that's concerned, because rather under 1% of barristers are disabled. 1%, rather under that. I have spoken for 18 years about the fact that the White Book, the civil procedure rules, which apply to everything but criminal and family cases, in fact applies to employment tribunals, don't mention either vulnerable people or disabled people at all at any point. Wow. They don't mention vulnerable people at any point until the 6th of April this year, when unbeknownst to the legal world, unbeknownst to the disabled world, there suddenly was Rule 1 was changed so as to encompass the fact that an overriding objective was to help vulnerable people and people with disabilities through the court process, reasonable adjustments, all kinds of things which we disabled people had known was what had been decided in international law under the UN Convention over rights of persons with disabilities, literally as long as 17 years ago. And the courts decided to action that 2 months ago, and decided to not tell anyone, including the Equality and Human Rights Commission, including the Law Centres Network, and including any kind of disabled person's charity. I count that as a win. I count that I made the point 18 years ago and have continued to make the point. I don't know how many of you are familiar with my practice, but I single-handedly fought for disabled people having the right to reasonable adjustments to the court process, with Mr. Rackham's case and others, single-handedly change the law, change it so certainly in Northern Ireland, you were admonished if you were a High Court judge by the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal for the fact that you didn't have a look at the equal treatment bench book, and you didn't have reasonable adjustments to the court process. That in turn led to the High Court changing their rules, so you had the same thing. Not a word of thanks, not a word. I mean, they didn't acknowledge that I'd made a difference. I wrote an article in Council and an article in the Legal Action Group, the only barrister who pointed out this historic change in the way that the civil courts did their procedure as far as disabled people were concerned. The thing which this has so much made me think is that it's time for a change. Although not all judges are right-wing, a substantial part of them are. A substantial part joined the Garrick Club. Do you know a third of judges in the UK belong to that club? A third of judges, and it's only eligible. You're only eligible if you're a man. They had the opportunity to change that 3 years ago. They didn't. Can you imagine? What sort of person, what sort of judge would say, oh, my vote, I vote, let's keep this just men, shall we? And simultaneously, they're supposed to be acting in our disabled people's interest. I have fought for disabled people in a situation which, since the last Labour government, simply I look up and now there's no one around doing that for disabled people because it doesn't pay at all or very much. I am committed to disabled people and will be committed until I die. But the level of engagement that you find at all elements of Tory or Tory-led government is, they don't want to listen. They don't want to listen because you're disabled. They don't want to listen even to me, even if I come to the House of Parliament to give an election. They don't want to listen. So I'm going to join the Labour Party. I'm going to try and sit down with my fellow Labour peer people and to run through that with them what the UN Convention on Rights of People with Disabilities is, what it says, and how it's since Brexit been ignored by the English courts, which is itself a breach of the UN Convention. Because I agree with Neil, something has to change. And it's not sufficient to say, oh, this has to change with this person. We need an upgrade in benefits and whatever. The culture of disabled people has to change. Able-bodied people in positions of power have to really be taken by the strap of the neck and said, this is not good enough. I'd like to leave on this note. I also have a second job. I work Saturday mornings in Oxfam Bookshop, Kentish Town. Great shop. If any of you are in the area of Kentish Town on a Saturday morning, pop in because I'm always there. I've been doing that for 18 years. It's good for my soul. But also, it is surprisingly excellent over secondhand books. And Simple Justice, it's a book by an American author which charts the experience of Black Southern states individual since slavery was the end of American Civil War, and through all of the Jim Crow years until now. Excellent read, highly recommended. But I get from that I look to the Black community, both in America and this country, and I'm astonished by the vigor which they come back and back and back to this problem, and they suffer defeat upon defeat upon defeat, but eventually they win. We can win. I proved that we can win. 18 years ago, I pointed out the injustice, disabled people not being mentioned. And last April, the law was changed. And changed so as to benefit, I think 25% of litigation users are disabled. So it's a massive change. We can win. But what we need is to work together. So that's my say. Thank you very, very much indeed.